Danny Gilfillan for Boxing News. Delighted to be joined here in Manchester with Russ Anber. Russ, as I said to you off camera at the start of the press conference, I wasn't expecting to see you back in England so soon, but here we are.
Yeah, look, it happens, right? I travel where the fights take me, so whenever it brings me back to the UK, I enjoy, especially Manchester.
Yes, and I just overheard a conversation, so I've got to bring up. You're currently working on a book. Just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, listen, we're working on a book. You know, October is going to mark my 47 years in the game. You know, from the October 2nd, 1979 was the first pro corner I ever worked. You know, and here I am. You know, all these years later, still doing it, and you know, I absolutely love it. So I thought it was time to maybe, you know, I've been so fortunate to work with such great people, such great fighters, and I just thought it's time to tell that story and you know, leave a little memory of what my time in boxing was like.
Yeah, you're known as a bit of a Swiss Army knife in boxing. I overheard an interview done with Andy there mentioning some of the fighters you work with. Without giving away too much, is there a standout period, moment that's referenced in the book that people would potentially be interested in?
Yeah, I'm sure there will be. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, I've been fortunate enough to have worked with maybe two of the greatest fighters in boxing history in Loma and Usyk. So, you know, I'm really blessed to have done that. And then there's other fighters I've worked with that I've had such a joy and pleasure working with, and some great experiences and great training camps and some good times, some bad times, you know. But it's all been a hell of a ride in this sport. So yeah, I think we're going to try to put a little everything in there, you know, spill some beans on some things, and although Usyk already spilled the beans on Ivan, you know, that was I don't know, and that was our thing. And if you watch the press conference when they talk about that, he looks up, he says, "Russ," and he realizes I'm not in the room for the press conference and should have been there, because him and I would have had such great banter with that, because that was something we did over 10 years ago, you know, that we developed this, I don't want to say invented the punch, but we developed this rapport and this secret code that we had between us in using this punch, and he finally exposed it. So we've kept that a secret for all these years.
And I think because you mentioned Alexander Usyk and Vasily Lomachenko, as Eastern European fighters maybe don't have the best English, there is that sort of air of mystique around them. So I'm sure, you know, Boxing News viewers, they love their boxing, they're hardcore boxing fans. There'll be some great insight there, and we'll let people know that they can check out the book for sure. Want to talk about the reason you're here today? Young Jack Turner, it was referenced in the press conference there, is punch power. You're not someone who engages in hyperbole. You say pound for pound, this kid's bang up there with the heaviest hitters you've ever seen. What was your first reaction when you saw this little lad from Liverpool, softly spoken, angelic baby face, and you realised he could hit like a train?
Man, I looked at Joe McNally and I said, "What?" Like, you know, he says, "I told you, Russ, I told you." And I was just saying, I was just talking to Andy, and I said, even science can't explain where that is generated from. What gives somebody that type of power? And I think you could say that in any sport, whether it's a pitcher, how fast he throws a baseball, or, you know, why there's this explosiveness, power, or speed that just comes from somewhere that nobody else has. Like, what is in the body that does that? And that he's the question. You know, I mean, like, if you put him beside top flight middleweights, he's punching harder than some top flight middleweights, and that's saying a lot.
When you've got someone with that level of power, is the training, is it about making sure they don't fall in love with that power? Is that the key thing? Because there is going to come a stage, particularly in the lower weight classes, when the power's not enough.
That's and as a trainer, that's what would be my concern. That's what I keep telling Joe, and I keep trying to drive it home with Jack as well. You know, that first of all, power only matters when you land, right? So what does power mean if you're fighting somebody like a Shakur Stevenson, where it doesn't land? So it doesn't matter how hard you punch; it becomes completely irrelevant. And there could be a time you come across a fighter that's going to be just like that. You better have something else in your toolbox besides that. And one of the things that you want to do with a fighter, or that I've always tried to do with fighters, is work on not their good stuff, because we know their good stuff is good. Is work on what not so good. So I hope that Jack never loses sight on his focus on his fundamentals, his skill set. You know, be able to do things as if he didn't have the power. Because if he can do that, then he can go a long way.
Yeah, looking forward to see Jack Turner, El Terrier, back this Saturday night. Russ, the last time we spoke was in the immediate aftermath of Alexander Usyk's win over Daniel Dubois. Just reflections on that night. Obviously, a special night at Wembley Stadium. Loads of Ukrainians turned out. Felt like it was a 50-50 split, if not perhaps a bit more in favour for Alexander. Just what were those days and weeks like, reflecting on what I'm sure didn't come as a surprise, but yeah, a real standout night.
I'm not sure, Dan, if I told you this, but I can't think of a fighter. Now, you could say, okay, Sugar Ray Robinson was very popular in the UK. Muhammad Ali was very popular in the UK. But I can't think of a fighter, who fought more often in the UK and succeeded in capturing the fans, more than Alexander Usyk. There's never been an outsider that has captivated the British public the way Usyk has, and that's not easy to do. British fans are a tough fan. They're hard to win over. They're, like they say, a tough crowd. They're a tough crowd, and he's won them over. And you didn't even get the feeling that when we walked into Wembley that we were the out of town fighter. It almost felt like we were fighting in our hometown. And I make it a point that when I go to a ring, when I'm walking towards a ring, I keep my head down. I've got my buckets in my hand. I'm looking where I'm walking, and I'm focused on getting to that corner. And when I get into the corner, I set my things down, and I'm just focused on working on my fighter and doing everything I can that my fighter wins. And after he scored the knockout, and finally there's an air of decompression that happens in your body, and you realize that the pressure is all off now, and you can relax. And I looked up and looked around Wembley, and I went, wow, this is crazy. It was to think that there's a 20 by 20 ring set in this giant place that has more people than some cities have, right? And you're in there, and it was really a great night and a special night. And I'm glad I could be part of that. When I think back that I wasn't even 10 years old yet. I hadn't yet turned 10. I was 9. I turned 10 in a couple of weeks when Ali fought Fraser, and I fell in love with boxing. And I never would have dreamed that I was going to be in the corner and be part of the journey of the man who you can consider now maybe one of the greatest fighters, if not the greatest heavyweight in boxing history. And that's pretty special, man.
Have there been any conversation as to what could be next? We know the WBO have ordered Joseph Parker as a fight for Alexander Usyk. They've granted us an extended period of time for a decision to be made on that. I spoke to Sergey Lapin yesterday. He was in Manchester for the Daniel Lapin press conference, and he said there's been no real conversation. Alexander, of course, has earned the right to decide his own future. Just anything you could tell us on that potential Joseph Parker fight?
I don't know. I mean, the one thing I can say is that Joseph Parker sure has finally earned a shot at the title. And I think that's something that we have to remember in boxing, that, fighters have to earn a shot at the title. You don't just get given them because you say you want to fight. I want to fight. Well, did you earn the shot at the fight? And in fairness to Daniel Dubois, after losing to Usyk, he succeeded in working his way back and earning a shot again. He earned the shot. He scored that big win over Anthony. He had 3 big wins to get back into the thick of things and earn a shot. So, good for him. And I think Joseph Parker certainly has earned his shot. The only thing that I have reservations about is that, we keep putting Usyk in these positions where he's got absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose, and that's sad. And I don't want his legacy to go that way. And even it could be a fight that he wins. Look what happened with George Foreman. I believe it was George Foreman and Shannon Briggs, where Foreman beats him, in his last fight of his career and doesn't get the decision. He didn't deserve that. He didn't deserve to go out on a loss like that. So I don't want that to happen to Alexander Usyk.
So, is that you saying that? People have said that they echo your thoughts that Usyk has completed boxing in a sense. What is left to prove? Would you, part of you, almost like to see Alexander retire because there's nothing to top what he's done almost?
Yeah, absolutely. But I wouldn't be to say make him retire. I'll stand by his side, because sometimes fighters do things because they love it, not just because of the money. Because if it was just about the money, he wouldn't have to fight again. We understand that. But fighters fight beyond the money sometimes. They make the money that they'll never spend. They'll never finish spending it, before their life is over. And they'll just pass that on. It's not about the money. He'll do it because he loves it. But, yeah, I would absolutely like to see him call it a day and, maybe lend his knowledge to future fighters coming up, or, and be an influence in what professional boxing really should be and how how professional fighters should conduct themselves and the discipline they should have, and conduct in a professional manner like he does. But I'm always worried about him, having to put everything on the line against people who have absolutely nothing to lose. As a matter of fact, they're collecting a payday. Even if they don't win, they still collect a massive payday. So I hope he doesn't ever get tarnished by that.
You said earlier Joseph Parker's the man who's earned his shot, but a young man who people think might have the best chance is Usyk-Itauma, based off his win over Dillian White. Before we come on to a hypothetical fight between those two, just how impressed have you been with Moses as a 20-year-old heavyweight? Never had a senior amateur contest to have achieved what he has in, I think, 13 fights.
Yep. And you know what? When I look at him, I don't look at him the way maybe you guys in the media look at him, or the way the layman looks at him. I look at him from a coaching eye and a coaching perspective, and I look and I see, how's he landing those shots? What's his feet like? What's his defense like? What's his technique throwing the hooks and throwing the straight shots? And I'm seeing a guy who right now, at least, and I don't know what's going on in the gym or what he's doing in the gym to really give you the facts, but what I'm seeing, he is as technically sound, if not Usyk aside, may be one of the most technically, if not the most technically sound heavyweight in the world today, from his basic fundamentals, and I'm a guy who stresses on those fundamentals, and it's important to me, and he's doing that. He's answering those questions, man. He's as good as they get right now. He's textbook almost, and if he can carry that on and not worry about, like I said, just getting caught up in the power, like we said about Jack, if he can do that, he can end up ruling this division for a long time.
You said about Joseph Parker that it's a fight where there's not much to gain for Alexander. I wonder with Moses, because in the short term you could say there's maybe nothing to gain. Moses doesn't have a world title. It's not a fight that would be as big as a Tyson Fury or an Anthony Joshua. But if Moses is to go on and become the next dominant heavyweight, and Alexander has a win over him, that's a one name that could be a legacy bolster for Alexander.
Of course it could, but at the top, but when you step in the ring, it would be again a situation. I didn't just say this about Parker; it's about anybody he fights. It's everything to lose and nothing to gain. But I think if I'm in Itauma's camp, I'm saying, yeah, I want that fight. The same way that Canelo jumped at the opportunity to fight Floyd when he was 21 years old. Okay, so he got beat, big deal. Went on to have greatness after that, you know what I mean? And now, like you said, that name is also on Mayweather's record, and I think Mayweather was smart in the timing of when he took that fight, knowing that he had the experience. So, yeah, it's potentially very possible that could happen, and that it could transpire into exactly what you said, that, Itauma goes on to have a great career. But the focus on Itauma right now, looking at him, I think he's got all the stuff. I think he's got all the tools. I think technically he's sound, and if he's got the capacity of going the distance, and he's able to do it under pressure, and you answer those questions in the gym, then yeah, I think this guy could be the face of boxing and another British heavyweight king.
Just lastly on Moses, the one thing that you allude to there we haven't seen from him is rounds in a tough fight against a live heavyweight. There's not too many names that jump off the page that could potentially give him that. Is there any names you would like to see Moses in with if you were building him in the traditional sense to get those rounds?
Yeah, that's the only way I can answer that question for you, Danny, honestly, is to say I need those questions answered in the gym. I need to know, what does he do good? What does he not do well? What do we need to work on? Let's say, for example, you want to see if you can go 12 rounds. Okay, well, now I'm going to bring in 3 or 4 sparring partners. I'm going to have a 12-round sparring session. I'm going to give them each 2 or 3 rounds most. I'm going to keep throwing fresh bodies who are going to pressure him, work him, and see what he can do. And then I'm going to answer those questions knowing what he can do before I take it on in the ring. And if he's doing all the things right, if his fundamentals are as good as he may never have to do that in a ring, much the same way that, Joe Louis didn't have to do that, because he was knocking guys out because he did his work in the gym and he was so technically sound. He was knocking out guys in fights and wasn't going rounds. He didn't have to go rounds because he was knocking them out. And if he did, he was able to do it. So I think you have to make sure you answer the questions in the gym, stay disciplined, do the preparation in the gym, and then you'll be able to take guys out early, and you don't have to, you've done your hard work, and I think that's the most important thing.
Russ, we've talked on some of the very best boxing has to offer today in terms of Alexander Usyk and Usyk-Itauma. I just want to get your thoughts on, I don't know, I guess who you ask, but the other side of things. We saw Gervonta Davis, Jake Paul announced for November 15th. Now, I saw a clip from, I think it was Sean Zettel, an American reporter, and he sort of summarised this as a symptom of the post-Mayweather era and this culture of the most money possible for the easiest fights possible, and that should be above all else. Do you subscribe to that view? Is that what we're seeing, given how long you've been in boxing? Have you seen that shift from taking on the best comer to taking on the easiest payday?
Absolutely, and I think this is what the world has become as well. I think even in business we're doing that. No more customer service. If you want to, I'll tell you a story just to give you an idea. Put this into perspective of what the world has become. We're at a fight in Liverpool. And I come to check in at the hotel. Yes, Mr. Anber, okay, you're here for us with these amount of nights, checking out on such and such a day. And I said, is that the Saturday? They said, yeah. I said, no, I'm not checking out Saturday. The fight's Saturday. I'm checking out Sunday. Can you please just change my checkout date? Oh, I'm sorry. You'll have to go on the app and do that. I'm at the front desk of your hotel. What do you mean I have to go on the app? Oh, yeah, you have to do this on the app. Are you insane? And I think this is what the world has become. So we're just seeing insanity across the board in every way possible, and it's manifesting itself in boxing as well. I mean, to think that there have been networks and television that have turned down mega fights, great fights, because they didn't want to put it on, or they didn't do it, or they didn't want to pay the money, and now you have Netflix, who's a giant worth billions of dollars, paying to broadcast a fight between an exhibition, which is ultimately a glorified sparring session, which no one's allowed to knock out, no one's allowed to do this, you can't do that, you can't. So it's arranged, it's agreed upon what's going to happen. You're doing this, and Netflix is going to air this between a lightweight and a cruiserweight. Okay, well, and athletic commissions are going to take their piece of the action on this. They're going to be there, and you're allowing this to happen. I mean, it defies logic. I don't even know I'm speechless. I don't even know what to say anymore when I hear about this. And to think that they were also talking about potentially Jake Paul against Anthony Joshua, and we're going to all say this is okay? I don't get it. I have no answers for this. I don't know. Everything I've ever learned, Danny, in my life serves me zero purpose in this day and age now. I am clueless.
What does boxing as a whole do? Is it adapt? Does it fight? I mean, networks are going to continue to support these events if they deliver the numbers, and I imagine there will be dozens of millions, if not more, of people watching that. Is it a question of acceptance, or is it anything?
It's a good question. I don't know. I think it just does what it's always done. If it puts asses in the seats and eyeballs on the television, then I think it's going to do it, and it's going to whore itself out the best way it can to make the money. And I think it certainly is not the boxing that I grew up in, or the boxing we read about, or the glory days of boxing. And it's not about that anymore. It's something totally different. And it seems like everybody, including fighters, promoters, are just trying to be as outrageous as possible, to almost to the point where you're treating this like it's wrestling, like there's almost a script to it, and people are falling for it. Like they're buying in to the sizzle, and they don't care that there's not a steak there. It's all sizzle and no steak.
That's a good analogy. Is this the final nail in the coffin for any hopes of seeing Gervonta Davis in the fights fans have called for him to take for years? Shakur Stevenson, Devin Haney. I mean, he's not shown a great ambition for those contests before. What I imagine will be, a career high payday times 10. So is that any hope of seeing those fights done?
I think in whether it's him or just in general, right now, and we haven't had this in boxing in a while. Right now, the lightweight division is a talent-laden division, in which we haven't had really a division that's been so talent-laden. Poor Golovkin went through his entire career in a middleweight division void of any talent, in what should have been, middleweights have always been good, right? And, void of any talent whatsoever. And when there was one guy like Canelo, it took years to make that fight, right? Like, they aged him out. They left him on the barbecue so long he just shriveled up, right? And we have an opportunity to see fights in the lightweight division that are outstanding, and we're not seeing them. And nobody cares. Like, I think the fact that boxing has removed itself from mainstream sports has given it a carte blanche to do whatever the hell it wants, and it's not unaccountable to anybody. You know, no one has to. You're not accountable. No one says to you, "Hey, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you?" No, they don't care. It's off the grid. They don't care about it. It's not on your regular sports news. You know, the regular human out there doesn't care. It's a niche audience of people who follow it, and you know, it's allowed to do whatever it wants. And if you like it, you buy the ticket. If you don't, you don't. They don't care. So I think that's what it's become, and that's not what I'm about. So I mean, I love the game for what it is and for the purity of it, but that doesn't seem to be lasting in boxing or in anything for that matter.
Want to end on a bit of a positive, Russ, or something I hope will be.
I didn't mean to be negative here. It's just the way it is. It's done it to itself, you know. Yeah.
Canelo Crawford, creeping closer. Obviously, there's a big weight disparity there in terms of the jump Terence has made. Of course, started as a lightweight, but is that one that it'll draw big eyeballs? But that's more often the good in boxing. Do you see?
Yeah, I think the bad part of that is that Canelo has, and I guess he's, you know, like Sergey Lapin said, he's earned the right to call his own shots. You know, he hasn't made a mandatory defense of his WBC crown since I think 2021. You know, which is insane to think of that. I've never been somebody who was for a unified champion. I think my thinking on this is that a guy can win a unified title, become undisputed, right? Becomes undisputed, gets to hold the title, all the titles for 6 months, take his pictures, you know, do his stuff, and then splinter them again and keep the division, keep the boxing, the champions going. I don't think it's realistic in this day and age to say we only have to have one champion. It's not realistic, you know, because a guy's only going to fight once or twice a year, and then you have a bunch of contenders just sitting around twiddling their thumbs waiting for a shot at a title. So I think it's good that we splinter the titles and try to make an undisputed champion, and then splinter them again. I think that's a good thing for boxing. Creates interest. But I think in the case of Crawford and Canelo, I think this is a good fight. I think history has proven that talented fighters who move up in weight class have had success. So I'm going to go out on a little bit of a limb here and think that the overall science and skill set of Crawford might be enough to derail the punching power and size of a Canelo. So I'm leaning to Terence Crawford.
Funny you bring up the WBC situation, because you're right. I don't think Canelo's been given a mandatory since Anvi Yildirim, which I think was 4 or 5 years ago. But Christian Mbili, who's got the WBC interim world title, has been given 2 mandatories back to back.
Back to back, and he's sitting there waiting on his chance. The only unfair thing I find about this fight, while again Crawford has had a great history, great career, you know, gets to leapfrog 2 divisions into a title fight with the guy who's the cash cow of the sport. And I'm like, wait a minute, what about all those 10 guys that are sitting there that have been campaigning at super middleweight, waiting for their shot at a title and not getting it? That to me is the unfair part of boxing, and it goes back to, okay, what's going to draw the most money? Oh, that fight? Okay, forget about all you guys. Doesn't matter what you've done. This guy's the guy who's going to generate more cash. We're going to bring him in. And I'm not sure that boxing is supposed to work that way. Business works that way, you know, but I'm not sure boxing's supposed to work that way.
Very last question, Russ, because you give me plenty of your time. If Terence Crawford was to pull it off and beat Canelo Alvarez, I think most boxing fans and pundits, they have Alexander Usyk at the minute in a bit of a class of his own in terms of this era. Would Crawford join him if he was to pull it off against Canelo? Become a 3-weight undisputed world champion?
Join him, you mean as an all-time boxing great? He's already an all-time boxing great. He's going to get into the Hall of Fame probably on his first ballot, you know, so he's already an all-time great, even if he doesn't beat Canelo. The problem is if he does beat Canelo, what's he going to do with the belt? Because the reason he could beat Canelo is because of the styles. He's got the style matchup that could have him beat Canelo. But does he stay at super middleweight and start defending against other super middleweights, against Mbili or somebody else like that? That's a different. Those are different styles there, you know. I think maybe Mbili matches up good for him in terms of style, but other guys might not. So it's a super middleweight division. Does he stay there? That's the question, you know, or does he just grab the title and then say, "Well, I did what I want to do" and leave? You know, that happens sometimes as well.
Russ, thanks very much for the time. Looking forward to watching Jack Turner this Saturday night, and yeah, I think we've got a lot covered there. So enjoy the rest of the time in Manchester.